Good morning, kids, youth, and the young at heart. This is Pastor Carrie here. Thought I'd come and chat with you for a little bit. Normally, I know who I'm chatting with, and most of them are from Port Orange or Volusia County, but I suspect that we'll have some children and youth tuning in from all over, so my message will include some notes for you as well. Locally here, most of our schools are shut down, and so you might be a little bit disappointed that things have been canceled. I know my kids were looking forward to a SeaWorld trip with their class, and that's been canceled. So there's been some sadness around that, and we've had the opportunity to talk about why we're canceling things, even if they're not at great risk of getting sick. So that's something good to know, that although there's a lot of news on the TVs and on social media, we are seeing that it's less likely that kids and youth will get sick. And if you get sick, you probably won't get seriously sick. So it might seem like, well, why are they making all these changes if I'm not in danger? And I thought I'd show you a little book, and maybe that would help. This is a really cool book. It's called The Trees of the Dancing Goats. And it's actually a story about a Russian Jewish family living in Michigan in the early 1900s, and they were preparing for their Festival of Lights, or Hanukkah. And the little girl ran to go get something from her best friend, her neighbor, and realized that their family was really sick with scarlet fever. And so she ran home and she told her mom, and she was really sad about it. And they kept on preparing for their big holiday celebration for the Festival of Lights, and they got the menorah out to light the candles, and Grandpa made some really cool wooden ornaments and sculptures that the kids could play with, and they went on with their preparations for Hanukkah. But as they were celebrating Hanukkah, they all thought of their neighbors, because they were hearing stories that many of them were sick with scarlet fever. And they decided that they wanted to do something to help, because their neighbors were all Christians and they should have been preparing for Christmas, but none of them were able to because they didn't feel well enough. So this family went and cut down some trees, and all of the little animal sculptures that were meant for gifts for the kids were made into ornaments to hang on those trees, and they made some food for their neighbors, and they left one candle that they could light when they were feeling well enough. And they went around and delivered these gifts to their neighbors because they wanted to make for sure that their emotional and spiritual needs to celebrate Christmas and to celebrate God coming into the world could be met even when they were not feeling well enough. And I tell you this story, I wish I could read the whole story to you, but one, that would take too long, and two, you shouldn't read someone's work if they need to pay for it. That's a good lesson. You can ask your parents or grandparents about it. But I'm showing it to you, so if you want to get it on Kindle, or if you want to order it on Amazon and read it right now, it would be a good time to do so. But I'm also showing it to you because I think that's a little bit about how we can think about coronavirus. Even though we aren't sick, and if we're younger, we're likely to not get very sick, we can still think of ways that we can take care of those at risk or who are already sick. And the way that we can take care of them is that we don't gather in large groups, because that will spread the virus and expose not only us, but the people in our lives who are at risk, like older people or people who are already sick. So if you were to think about like your favorite grandparent or your favorite person who is older or who is sick, I know that just like this family, you would want to make for sure that they were taken care of, that their physical and emotional and their spiritual needs were all taken care of if they weren't feeling well. And one of the ways we can do that is by not gathering. So that's kind of hard to understand, but I hope that you and your parents have an opportunity to talk about it. And you might also read John chapter 4 to see another example of how Jesus and his disciples took care of their neighbors when everyone was kind of overwhelmed and fearful because they were under Roman rule or oppression. So they weren't free, and they were really restricted on what they could do and what money they could make and what they could do. And in that time, the way they dealt with that, a lot of people just said, well, we'll just kind of take care of our own. And maybe they were even more fearful of people who they didn't like, or people who were different than them. And Jesus totally upended that. He made a point of going into Samaria, a group of people that the Jewish people disagreed with about where God was and how you worshiped God. And he goes into Samaria and he affirms to this woman. And back then, men didn't really talk to women. So there's another way that he reached out to his neighbor to affirm that they could connect with God and that God was with them today even, not later, but right now. So why don't you and your parents and your grandparents and your loved ones think about how you can affirm for the neighbors in your life who are probably a little bored and maybe a little fearful and maybe a little angry that they can't move around. Maybe you're feeling that way too. How can we affirm for them that God is with them and that they can connect with God even amidst all these changes? Let's say a little prayer together, shall we? Good and gracious God, we thank you for coming into the world. And showing up, especially when we're afraid, be with us through this pandemic of coronavirus. And show us how to tune our hearts to the needs of our neighbors, especially now when we're afraid and anxious. When we get scared, give us comfort and show us how to comfort others. In your son's name, amen. I hope you guys have a great week, and I will leave you another little message next week. Till then.